This is Real People, Real Stories. The purpose of these interviews is to uplift, motivate, and encourage. And remember, these are real people with real stories. It's not your story or mine, it's their stories and their testimonies. God first and overcome by testimony.
Check. I get wins, no days off. I don't stop.
People, if you may not be familiar with Michael or his background, like I said, he was the close friend of LAPD detective Russell Poole, who worked the case of Biggie Smalls. And actually, as I was just looking
Tupac is no longer able to testify. Suge Knight saw what happened. He saw who did it, and he's always known who did it. And he knew that they were trying to kill him. Now, the rumors were circulating. They were going to try and kill him again. And, you know, that all came to a head when he went to jail in October of 1996. And then from that point on, his probation was violated and he went to prison, and he did a stint in prison.
Now, why was that? Because don't mean to cut in, but I did see like two different stories. I mean, I seen one published in the LA Times back then, of course, with the kicking, but then I seen something about him leaving. He violated probation because he left the country. So what did they convict him on, or do you know?
Well, so you got two things happening, right? You got Suge, who's no longer wanting to roll with his former security. And that former security happened to be Reggie Wright Jr. He was the head of security for Death Row. And so you got Suge. He no longer wants to have the current security that were guarding him be his security, and he's rolling with his homeboys, is what he called them. And so those are all convicted felons, which is a probation violation for him, rolling with convicted felons. And then, of course, they go off to Belize, and they're trying to set something up in Belize, and that's also a probation violation if he leaves the country. And who is it that drops the dime on him when he's leaving the country? It's Reggie Wright Jr. Reggie Wright Jr. Reggie Wright Jr. goes over to sworn law officer Knox, and he tells him that Suge is leaving the country and violating his probation. And so these are contributing factors, but what they eventually charge him with is violating the probation by doing the kicking. And the tape from the MGM of the beatdown of Orlando Anderson, the only reason we even know about it was entered into evidence by David Kenner.
Whoa, the lawyer.
The lawyer that's representing Suge. It gets entered into evidence. Now,
why you think he did that? Why would that get entered into there? Because I seen in the news article, Kenner was saying it's not fair for a guy to get 9 years over a kick, or from just seeing this footage that he didn't do. And even Orlando Anderson said he didn't do it, whatever. But why? So why would Kenner enter that footage in there?
Well, because clearly he wants to pretend like he's representing Suge Knight and doing a good job, but he also wants to see Suge Knight taken away from his money so that they can haul the wealth of Death Row Records. And that's what they do. They take the wealth of Death Row Records.
Who is they? Who is they?
Well, so who runs Death Row Records in the immediate aftermath? If you listen to the former mayor of Compton, he says from the time Suge Knight goes to jail and then subsequently goes to prison, that there is no difference between Death Row Records and the Compton Police Department. They operate as one and the same entity. And when they get done hauling the wealth of Death Row Records, they set their sights on the city of Compton, and they haul the wealth of the city of Compton. And so you can see this through line. It's the same circle of people in all of these crimes. It's the Rampart Scandal cops working with the Compton PD, and the Compton PD actually works off duty as security at the MGM.
Oh, That's powerful, and that let's get into I know it's a lot with that as far as, and that's what we started on last week. For everybody that may be seeing this for the first time this week, I see a lot of people in the chat with the prayer hands. God bless y'all. Flipper, I see you. Tony, I see you. Shelby, North Carolina, 704. Mr. T. Ross, Trevor, I see you. He said, "Dirty cop, his time is coming." The people speaking out. Miss Sachet, I see you. New York, you said you reap what you sow. That's Galatians 6 and 7. So it's all coming full circle. So with that all being said, let's talk about Keefe D. Let's go get into that, and then and Orlando Anderson, because we're speaking about the truth. We're speaking about takeover. We're speaking about motives. We're speaking about the case. We take probation violation, the night of Tupac's unaliving, the night of this case. So how does Keefe D relate to this? Was he in Las Vegas? Was he in the car? Orlando? Did he get stumped? Was he there? What's going on in your research and study through Mr. Russell Poole and yourself?
Well, I don't believe that Keefe D was in the car, and I don't know whether or not he was in Las Vegas. I have no way to know the answer to that question. But I just say this: Reggie Wright Jr. basically offers up Keefe D for the Biggie killing, and there was a car that matched the car that was used in the Biggie killing that was behind Keefe D's home, and he had it there because he couldn't afford to pay the payments on it, and so he put it, in the backyard and trying to hide it from the repo man. And so Russell Poole finds out that there's a car, and it's just crazy how this stuff goes down, right? Two of the Compton PDs happen to be meeting with an investigator when somebody calls in an anonymous tip on one of the Compton cops' cell phones and says it was Keefe D that was behind the murder. And so, you can't make this stuff up. And just that call comes in right when they're meeting with the investigator, which was before Russell had the case. It was a few days after, before Russell got the case. And so Keefe D's name is floated. Russell has a helicopter fly over and do film on the spot where the car is. And then they get a search warrant, and Russell goes to Keefe D's home to search. And when they get there, that car hasn't been moved in months. There's cobwebs, there's dirt, this car hasn't gone anywhere in months and months and months. So it's impossible that this was the vehicle that was used in the murder of Biggie Smalls. It's just impossible.
And this was in L.A., that car. Keefe's home was in L.A.?
This is in L.A. It's in Compton, actually. And so, they go look at the car, and he realizes, okay, Keefe D was not the shooter in this, and it's certainly not his car. But if you were planning the hit and you knew Keefe D had a car that looked just like this, then this is how you set it up. And we're obviously talking about some very sophisticated people, because there's some things that happen in that murder. One of them is Rafael Perez spoils the crime scene by messing with the shell casings. And Rafael Perez is an LAPD cop, and he's the Rampart scandal. He's one of the guys who stole the cocaine out of the evidence locker and goes to prison for that. But they also stole the evidence in the Snoop murder trial. All the shell casings and all that was stolen out of the Pacific Division. And that's probably where they started looking around these evidence lockers saying, wow, we could make some money here. We could haul these evidence lockers.
You said,
and that's
let me come in. You just said something very powerful and revelatory. You said on the Snoop Dogg case, his trial with the murder, you said Rafael Perez was involved in that case as well?
Yes. And that's what happens. We let the thieves into the record label. And you have David Mack, who does an armed robbery at the Bank of America. And Russell Poole wanted to look further into David Mack. That's part of what the stress was. And David Mack had Gecko ammunition. Gecko ammunition is used at the Biggie killing. Russell Poole is told to stand down. No, David Mack's going down for the bank robbery. We're going to just let that be it. We don't want to look into him any further. You need to stand down. Don't look into him any further. And so this is what causes the stress. Now, here's something
Mm.
else kind of interesting. There are people who show up at Cedar Sinai where they take Biggie, and they are handing shell casings to the police. Now,
Wow.
of course, the police don't get any names, don't get any follow-up information about those people. And when they go to get the actual surveillance footage at Cedar Sinai, all of a sudden, that footage is no longer available. They can't
What?
get the footage of who brought these shell casings in. Those shell casings all get entered into evidence, and this whole case has been tainted and bungled in a way that it would be very difficult to get a prosecution if you had a murder weapon, because you'd be trying to match these shell casings, and you don't know if these are the shell casings that came into Cedar Sinai or the ones Rafael Perez threw down or the ones Rafael
Mm.
Perez kicked, or I mean, we have no idea. So this is a very sophisticated crime, the Biggie Smalls, unaliving, as you say.
Yeah.
And it's a very sophisticated crime, and it's one of those things that judges abhor, and that's why when it's premeditated, it carries a much stiffer penalty than somebody, like what happened at Tams with Suge Knight, where you hit the gas and you just happen there's somebody in the way and you run over them. That's that's one type of crime where, you're just trying to get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
Another type of crime is where you've meticulously planned it out, and you're going to unalive a spouse or whatever, maybe, kind of like what happened with Tupac. But when you get to the Biggie Smalls murder, this is a very sophisticated crime. I mean, we're talking about even tainting the crime scene. That is a very sophisticated crime, and so that kind of a premeditated thing becomes an over the top penalty, because these are people who, really could do damage to society if they are allowed to continue doing what they do.
And I gotta just say again, for everybody still tapping in, I got comments. I got a question too for you in the comments. I almost skipped past that. Let me scroll back up. But this is, ladies and gentlemen, the right hand man, the close friend of the detective Russell Poole, who worked for LAPD on the Biggie Smalls, the Notorious Big case, the unsolved case, the case that connected Valletta Wallace, the late mother of Biggie, to sue the LAPD. Russell Poole was the man. If you're not familiar with that name, type it in, Google it. You'll see the truth. You'll see everything. You see people trying to come against this man, trying to discredit this man, but this is his close friend right here. It's not what we heard or what they thought. This is eyewitness testimony. Michael Carlin, right now from California, Russell Poole's right-hand man, the late, great Russell Poole, his friend. So this is the testimony given. So let me ask this question. I'm going to scroll back up. Somebody had a question. Slick Rick 66 says, Michael, do you think the FBI are actively reinvestigating the Biggie case, or has Trump's order of all open federal civil rights investigations to be closed put a lid on that for good? That's the question.
I think if the fans out there really wanted both of these case files to be released, I think now is the appropriate time to make noise and to demand that these files all get released. They released the JFK files. They released, some of the other files in other open things. The Epstein files are likely to come out. The Diddy files are likely to come out. And I think right now, if we make some noise, maybe by the end of the Trump administration, they will release these files, because he has said he wants to be the most transparent president. And let's hold him to it. Let's ask him, hey, Donald Trump, Barack Obama asked you where Tupac and Biggie were at the correspondence dinner. So why don't you release those files and let's find out what happened to them?
So that's what it is, man. We got to make these people put their money where their mouth is. That's what I say. So I
Yeah,
don't care who's in office. Make them do what they say they were gonna do when they tried to get in, when they were wanting our votes and everything, and now they got it. Do what you said you're gonna do. So
that's
so
it.
just with that, just to keep it going, we got about 10 more minutes here on the show, and I want to get everything in, but y'all got to stick around for next week. I'll bring Mr. Michael Carlin back if you're available. Can you come back next week as well?
I'll come back next week.
Okay, perfect, perfect. So we will have you all back next week, but we got about 10 more minutes. I want to touch on what we were just speaking on as well, kind of to give a recap to some of the people where we're at. Make sure y'all look on last week's episode, Real People, Real Stories. We spoke about police, the corruption, the solution, the problem, and that's what leads all into the Biggie case, the Tupac case, and other, like the comments people are saying from Carolina said, it's still crimes going on now, deeper than Biggie and Pac, still need to be investigated in the industry. So even that, and we're speaking that it starts with the authority. It starts with people in position that have a badge or have authority, but they let something come in. And I know it as the spirit of this world. Like we spoke about, the devil running this world, having agents, having people that he uses. So when we let that come in, that trickles down to other taking of lives or losing or corruption, bribery, death, prostitution, trafficking, you name it, especially with the authority and a badge. So just going forward from there, you said Keefe D in Orlando, you're not sure even if they were there, but you know that it was set up meticulously by the authority, by outside sources. So just to conclude on everything, how do you feel about, and we'll get into it more next week, but like we said, Reggie Wright Jr., just kind of give a summary, and we'll get more into it next week.
Well, Russell Poole believed at the end of his life that Reggie Wright Jr. was the orchestrator of both of these murders. And he did an article. It was with Jeff Weiss, who is a rock and roll journalist. And in that, if you can look at it, it's I Think I Know Who Killed Tupac Shakur by Jeff Weiss. And he talks about it. He talks about how it was about the record label. It was about money. It was about a wife who would inherit the shares, working in conjunction with her boyfriend, who was an LAPD officer at the time. And he subsequently, after the Biggie murder, gets killed by another LAPD cop. And so that's a whole other area that Russell had to investigate. And Russell cleared that murder.
Mm.
And Frank Liga, who
Oh.
perpetrated that murder, said that it was a sanctioned hit by the brass at LAPD. Now he after that walks back that statement, but it kind of makes sense because Kevin Gaines, who was Sharitha's boyfriend, sues LAPD, and he is coming unhinged after the Biggie murder. And if something isn't done, he probably was going to spill the beans or do something. And so he ends up getting murdered by Frank Liga. And then Frank Liga swears up and down he didn't know who he was shooting. It was just some guy, road rage, what have you. But years later, he's teaching a bunch of cadets at the academy, and somebody is recording on their phone. And Frank Liga talks about how he knew who he shot at the time, and he wished that there had been a carload of them, whatever he meant by that.
Oh, wow.
Kind of a racist comment that he makes,
Wow.
and it's recorded. And
I
we
didn't.
have that got released. And when Russell heard that, and this is just before Russell died, he said to me, I would have never cleared that murder if I would have known that Frank Liga knew who he was killing. And there was a surveillance that was happening at a Bank of America, which was right around the corner from where the shooting happened. And the security people there heard the radio traffic, and it sounded like there were a bunch of other cops that were spotters and whatnot, very similar to what goes on with the Biggie Smalls murder, the Tupac murder, maybe the Bobby Finch murder, because it's probably radios and the whole thing. And so it's a very similar crime in some ways. It's a a car-to-car shooting. And that's how Kevin Gaines gets murdered. And Russell Poole also investigated that murder. And he would have never cleared it had he known that Frank Liga knew who he was shooting. And Frank Liga had said that it was a sanctioned hit by LAPD. And then he walked that statement back. No, I didn't mean that. Just crazy. But you can't make this stuff up. These are dots that all connect. And there are people that want to cover it up. The LAPD certainly wants to cover it up. And if you look at the through line with LAPD, they have never had a police chief that doesn't somehow tie back to the Rampart scandal ever since Bill Bratton was there. Bill Bratton was there. He was a friend of mine. He'd come to Century City and, done, many talks in Century City. His wife, Ricky Kleiman, was in Century City, and that was after the Rampart scandal. And then the very next uh, police chief is Charlie Beck. He ties to the Rampart scandal. Then Michael Moore ties to the Rampart scandal, and Jimmy McDonnell, who we set up the meeting with to for Russell to meet with at the sheriff's department, was the sheriff at the time. He is now the chief of LAPD, and he also ties back to the Rampart scandal. So they never want to let a lid off of these cases that have something to do with the Rampart scandal, because it just costs too much money to be truthful.
Especially, I know, like we said, Valletta Wallace was suing LAPD even up until now, but I know they closed the case. But I know Russ was on that, and he got a lot down to the bottom of it. But like you said, other officers such as Greg Kading and others to debunk kind of what Russ, and even to this day, like I said, I was looking at the channel and they were bringing up Russell's documents, his resignation from the LAPD, the reasons stated, what he said, personal things, and then they try to deny, like you just said, you named a lot of things going on, but in the document, it's Russell filed, he said that cases were not being handled properly by upper authority, and they denied it. They said everything Russ brought to us, we handled it. We thoroughly investigated it.
Of course they did.
And they put this in paper, and then they made it as like Russell didn't really combat the statement or have any other words, like as if he agreed, like, oh yeah, they did. But I according listening to you and then seeing what I see, of course I know that just wasn't the case. It wouldn't have been such a great officer and an upstanding citizen like Russ to just divert and go the opposite direction and not care. It just doesn't make sense. So just at the bottom line, and coming back even next week, speaking of Reggie Wright and authority and all of that, we're going to speak about the security, because even in the Tupac case, it was said that Suge said he wanted more security and they needed security, but it was said that Reggie took people off of Tupac on the biggest night of his life, and it turned out to be the biggest night because of what happened with the shooting. And then in the Biggie case, even Big Gene, I know you're familiar with him, security for Puffy. He even said that he told Puff, hey, we need more security, and that was denied. So what we're going to speak about that next week, about the denial of the security, of the protection from the heads and from these people in places. But I see some comments now. R.I.P. Miss Wallace, rest in heaven. Miss Sachet, I see you. You said you have devils leading with criminal behavior. It says people also make more money unalive than alive in the music industry. And he said, let's talk about insurance policies. So let me ask you before we wrap this up, because you said it last week, but just to reiterate, Mr. Michael, what did you say about the solution for the police corruption that you think, and briefly, what do you think the solution would be, in your words?
Well, one of the solutions certainly is that every police officer must be paid more money, because it cannot be allowed for them to work off duty and compromise themselves by using their badge and their gun in situations where they're going to have to turn a blind eye to crimes that they might witness. So we got to pay them well so that they are no longer allowed to work off duty and rent out that badge and that gun. And then the second thing that I see for sure is that they got to bring their own insurance to the department. And every time something happens, the insurance policy gets more expensive for them. And so they don't want to have huge insurance costs doing their job. So they're going to keep their noses clean, and they're going to be officer friendly. They're going to be like Russell Poole, integrity with a capital I, and try not to have insurance claims on their badge. And I think that's kind of, we could get into that, some night and really go on a deep dive into that. But I'll just say this too. I actually spoke to Suge Knight, and I released that in 2021 through the dossier.
Okay.
And my conversations with Suge Knight have been released, and he talked about how Reggie and Sharitha and Rafael Perez were great friends, and they were all trying to plot against him. And if you want, I mean, we can play some of that in a subsequent episode. But I'll say
Absolutely.
this. Suge Knight recently just came out on Art of the Dialogue, and he talked about what happened in the Snoop murder
Yeah.
and the fact that Malik was the one that took the fall for the murder of Philip Waldemariam,
And
who
that's
was
Snoop's
in
bodyguard.
yeah, that was Snoop's bodyguard, and he took the fall for it. Now there were two witnesses in that case that said there was a gun in Snoop's hand,
Mm.
and one of those witnesses was a woman who gets a record contract and goes to Houston, and she's no longer available to testify at the trial. So
Mm.
she's out. The other person that said that there was a gun in Snoop's hand was Malik himself because he started to feel like everybody else got bailed out. He was still in jail pending the trial, and he started to have a meltdown one night, and he went and confessed to the warden that Snoop had a gun in his hand. And that testimony gets stricken from the record and not allowed in. And Malik, of course, recounts it and says, no, 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 I didn't mean it. You know, I was just feeling nervous or whatever. And so there were two guns that were used in that. And that's why the shell
Mm.
casings had to go. And Suge Knight also said, he said, well, a 40 can fire a 38 bullet.
Yeah.
And so that's what they end up talking about in that case, that it was one gun and it was two different bullets, but it was the same gun. And so they are able to make the second gun just go away. And of course, the car is swept and what have you. And they said, well, I guess it got robbed and those guns got stolen out of the car and it's all wiped down, wiped clean before the police find the car. And so there are never any guns found in that case. But there was an eyewitness who had said that Snoop had a gun. And then, of course, Snoop gets off. Now, with Snoop's conviction in that case, there was one count that it was a hung jury, and so
Mm.
that can be retried at any time.
Mm.
And so Snoop is gonna do whatever he's told because they always have this to hold over Snoop's head, and most people don't realize that. There was one count that came back as a hung jury, and they decided not to proceed with a second trial. And
Wow.
that's kind of what the music industry is. We're going to compromise people. We're going to, whether it's underage people or whatever. I mean, that whole industry just functions with compromise. And they want to get people compromised. And there's nobody with the last name Houston that handles Whitney Houston's estate.
Mm.
There's
Mm-hmm.
nobody, and even the Biggie Small State recently
Oh
just
yeah.
sold. I mean, it's
Oh.
like, yeah. Who handles all these music catalogs? They're all handled and they're not to the benefit of the people or the families of the people who have passed. And what's the life expectancy of somebody who owns a big music catalog? It's not very good. It's a
Oh.
really bad statistic.
The money. Follow that money. So, but
Follow the money.
before we wrap this thing up, I know, man, that's very powerful. And I know for sure we get to the bottom of a lot of this. And anybody, like I say, with any information, like he said, the fans, that will be the way to petition, to open our mouth. It's life and death in the power of our tongue. That's the word of God. Make your voice be heard and be known. If you know something, if you've been researching and solving, let us know. Bring it forth right here. Bring it forth online. Catch us here on the show. Drop your comments and questions below. Out here from Little Rock, real people, real stories, and all the way to California. So before we go, next week we will be speaking on Suge Knight. I know you talked to him, and I seen on Choke's platform you said certain things about how the legal system is denying him certain things and doing them wrong. We'll speak on that next week. We'll speak on Reggie Wright Jr. as well, about his past, his current, what you think, what's going on, and just the proof coming out. And then Big Gene, of course, with just his security and the legal system for the next episode of what we said about authority and the badge. So before we wrap this thing up, I just want to put out some names for the people that we spoke about. We said David Mack, Rafael Perez, Reggie Wright Jr., Reggie Wright Sr., and even Kevin Hackey. 5 police officers all with felonies, all with crimes, all dealing in the street element, all have cases of corruption and other things, and some ongoing, but all work for authority and police force.
Yeah, I would say Kevin Hackey has been one of the greatest sources for us for information because he was working undercover for the FBI and ATF. And so a lot of what we know from Kevin Hackey. And my understanding is he wants nothing to do with these cases anymore. But I think we got some great information. He was one of the people that Russell Poole was able to interview, and he was a great source of information. And we have those transcripts. We have the transcripts of Russell Poole and Fred Miller speaking to Kevin Hackey. And I'll send you over that transcript. You can release it to your people. You know, anybody who wants to see it can read it for themselves.
You put it up, so we'll put that up. And it says in the chat, a person's character is not based on money, it's on who they are, and you reap what you sow. So, but that's pretty much everything we got tonight. Y'all got to come back. Again, this has been an explosive, truth-revealing episode of Real People, Real Stories right here live on LR 98.8, Little Rock, Arkansas to you. Again, this is Michael Carlin, the close friend of the late, great, rest in peace, Russell Poole, who was getting to the bottom of the Biggie case. LAPD detective, discovered a lot of things, but in his own words, they didn't follow investigation properly. They shifted him around. They didn't want things to go forward. Y'all look up that name, look up that, and look up, of course, Mr. Michael Carlin's own work, his documentaries, his books, his everything he's helped Russell in, and just a lot of things out there to get to the truth. So let us know in the chat below what y'all want to see, any questions, any comments next time, and we'll get on everything next time. Mike, God bless you, sir. Any last words, any words before we close out to the people, anything from your end?
Free Suge Knight.
Wow. God bless you for tapping in with this great interview. It's all done through Yahweh, God first, and all the connections he's allowed me to get. You got feedback? You got topics that you want me to ask the person? You got any questions? Anything that we didn't answer in full? Hit me up. Just send an email to 8amexposure@gmail.com. It's going to be listed right here on the screen. So hit me up. Let your voice be heard in this new year, 2025. Real people, real stories. Talk to me.
They took Pac, they took Biggie, so all they got is us, the Holy Spirit within me. God led me to write it, powerful words written. I ain't never met Pac, was just a kid that witnessed. I remember it was up, 96, the tension in the air, you could just feel it. You east or west had to pick it, ain't no middle grounds, homie. Carolina we living since we rocked in the South, we both relentless.